welcome to another episode of E by Gore, the horror movie podcast. I'm your host, Damien.
And I'm your other host, Tris. How are we doing?
Not bad. You?
I'm not too bad. All the better for seeing you in a Halloween mask.
It's better than the real thing.
I know, you don't want to take that off. You'll scare every single viewer going.
If it's good enough for Michael Myers, it is good enough for me.
Nice leading. I like it.
So, yeah, welcome to E by Gore. What is E by Gore, Tris? I know this was your brainchild, so why don't we tell people what E by Gore is?
Oh yeah, I mean, if anybody's sort of watching from Yorkshire, they'll get it straight away. But anybody that's sort of watching like further afield or anything like that, or listening further afield, they may not quite understand it. So there is a famous saying here in Sheffield and Yorkshire as well, where we say "e by gum" when something kind of shocks us, or something's a little bit out of the normal. So, e by gum. So there's only that's only right. It's for a movie podcast. Let's go for e by gore. We like a bit of gore. It's good. Blood, guts, that kind of stuff. Jobs are good.
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of my forte. I'm a big gore hound, so I'm looking forward to getting in some of these. So why choose E by Gore? Why choose us? There's so many other horror podcasts out there. So the thing that we're wanting to do differently is we're going to look at the world of horror movie franchises, because I don't know about you guys out there, but when I'm listening to podcasts or checking out YouTube channels for horror reviews, you always get the big ones. You get your Halloweens, your Texas Chainsaws. You do get some that delve into some of the more obscure stuff, but really you don't get many that go deep on these franchises. And for me, that's where the fun lives, is going deep on franchises like Texas Chainsaw Massacre or Puppet Master or Jaws or something like that. That's where the fun lives, because you get this sort of steady decline from the first one, and it gets worse and worse and worse until you either pull your hair out or you do discover some little hidden gems.
That's if you can manage to sit through the first one and actually pluck up the courage to watch the second one, because the first one was that crap.
Well, that's you. That's you in it,
Yeah,
Tris.
that is me. That is me.
I will sit and watch it. You were talking to a guy that last week sat down with a day off work and thought, how many of the Puppet Master movies can I fit in today? Spoiler alert, it was 8.
Oh, good God. When normal people sort of binge watch, Friends and Big Bang Theory and, the occasional odd horror movie, you watch Puppet Master, all 8 films.
What's normal? Well, it's actually 12. I didn't get
Oh,
get
God.
through the final 4. But I mean, what's normal? I love. I mean, that's the great thing about this, Tris. I mean, why don't you talk about your relationship with horror before I spring my trap on you?
Well, you can try. Yeah, I think you're very much like you like watching sort of any kind of horror, as we've discussed many, many times over. You will watch anything, B movies, Korean horror, Turkish horror, pretty much anything.
Oh
For
yeah,
me, I kind of like my horror a little bit more, I guess, ergonomic, a little bit more organic, a little bit more real. I want to be scared. I want to feel part of the experience. So, your Turkish horror, I think you told me about something that you watched at one point, and I was literally like, that does not sound like my thing. I want to be scared.
Awesome.
That's the one. I want to be scared. I want to feel my heart pounding in my chest. I want to jump. I want that scare. I want to feel part of the movie, and I want to feel like it's an organic experience. So I like my horror very much real, and I do struggle to connect with stuff that sort of isn't like that, as we'll probably find out a little bit later on.
Yeah, I think that's right. I will say, going back to the Turkish horror that you mentioned there, which is Baskin, if you like your horror scary, that is one to watch. I would not put that under the schlocky side of things that I watch. It's one of the most brutal, goriest movies I've ever seen. It's probably one we won't cover on here unless it gets a sequel. But yeah, I definitely recommend anyone go and check out Baskin. I think it's streaming on Shudder at the moment, or Amazon Prime. Go check it out. But yeah, I understand what you're saying. You're a bit of a fancy boy. You like all those big horrors, those shiny ones. Those great visual effects. I'll watch anything really. I tend to find something to love in most kind of horrors. I mean, as long as the filmmakers make it with love, that's kind of the big thing for me. So like, I will sit and watch full moon movies. Charlie Band stuff or Larry Cohen stuff, or anything like that, just because you can tell that the filmmakers have they've put a lot of effort into it. They're making great films, sort of despite budgetary issues. Whereas you look at something like low budget stuff like The Asylum, that specialize in mockbusters, and they're kind of just pushing any old shit out just for the sake of trying to make a few quid. That's not really my bag. But if I can find some low budget horror with a bunch of puppets or a bunch of dolls that come to life and want to skewer someone, I'm all for that. Last year around Thanksgiving time, which I know we don't celebrate here, but I come across a film called Thanksgiving about a killer turkey, and mate, it was fucking awesome. I think it was made on a budget of 1,500 quid, and I tell you something, it was one of the best 85 minutes I've ever spent. There is a sequel to
Killer
that,
Turkey.
a killer
There's
turkey.
a sequel to A Killer Turkey.
Mate, it was
Everybody's Thanksgiving and Christmas completely ruined. But
yeah.
you say there, I like my sort of like my fancy stuff. I like that, the big light stuff. I wouldn't probably say that's quite true because there are some really big budget movies, some really big fancy budget movies out there that I just don't connect with. I think the budget doesn't really matter. The effects don't overly matter either, as long as I get that scare factor. And I think that's the difference with me. I do like to be scared. I like my horror to be horror. And I think that's sort of where I sort of enjoy watching movies. Don't get me wrong, I will watch anything as well. You're probably going to make me watch some utter rubbish throughout part of this podcast series, but yeah, I'm down for it. Let's see if we can get some education on some terrible movies. You never know, I might actually be surprised.
Well, you do need some education on movies, and this is when we've talked about doing this for a while.
Yeah.
I know we have. And when we started talking about doing franchises, this was kind of like, you've given me a lot of shit over the years, not just in horror movies, but we've worked together in music and lots of different ways. So you've given me a lot of shit over the years, especially on stage. So when I found out that there was a possibility for me to make you sit through some of the most challenging horror movies of your life in terms of cheese and gore, when I know that you're really either not going to be into them or it's going to stretch you to really get into it. I thought this was perfect. We've started quite nicely this on this first franchise, but be prepared because we're going to be going deep. I've got a subscription to Full Moon Features, which is Full Moon's subscription. It's like their version of Shudder. And there's just access to everything they've ever done. Evil Bong, Killjoy, Puppet Master, all that sort of stuff. It's absolutely freaking awesome, and we're gonna hit all of it up.
When you say we're going deep, it sounds like our time in prison, mate. It really does.
This will be worse. But yeah, I mean, like I said, we're starting this batch of franchise movies with the classic. It's got everything to do with the fact that it is Halloween right now. Because if nothing else, we are shameless self-promoters. And there is also a new Halloween movie coming out in Halloween Kills, which we'll be covering as well. So yeah, we're going to be doing Halloween, the original 1978 one this time around. Tris, want to talk about the movie a little bit? What's your history with it? What was your experience of watching it for the first time?
Yes, I think I probably watched this, bearing in mind it's a 1978 film, so I wasn't even a sperm back in 1978. I'm 39, 40 in December, so this is even before my time. So, it's quite an old one, but I watched this probably when I was about 11, 12, 13-year-old for the first time. Didn't really get any scare from it then, but then again, I was very young, very, very new at that age. Probably shouldn't have actually been watching it, to be fair, but as we all do, we all watch stuff that we shouldn't be watching, don't we? But yeah, I mean, sometimes, things which are old can age like a fine wine. This one, I have to be honest, when you said, yeah, let's do this one for the first one, there was very little I could actually remember about the plot, about the actual thing. Obviously, the one iconic thing that comes out of it is the one iconic character, which anybody that follows horror sort of knows about, Michael Myers and Mikey, good old Mikey. That's something that everybody, even if you're not really a horror fan, if you watch any of the films, you know that that's the lasting sort of thing, which is all about Halloween, the films. Did know a little bit about it, obviously from being a musician, the good old director, and that he was kind of responsible for absolutely everything in this film. But it was like kind of watching it with fresh eyes. When you've not watched it for almost 20 years and you can't remember much about it, it was nice to actually watch it with complete fresh eyes and watch it with maybe a critical view in mind of doing this podcast as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what I would say before we start really in on this podcast, on this review, is we're not intellectuals here, guys. I mean, you can tell I'm wearing a creepy mask, and Triss is old.
I don't know if I'm more scary than you, to be fair.
I'm not sure, but we're not scholars. We're definitely not film scholars. We're not here to take you blow by blow through cinematography and all that sort of stuff. We're just here to really poke fun and have a bit of a laugh and talk about our experiences with it. We're not going to go blow by blow on Halloween. I mean, it's the most pointless thing. I mean, you can probably find, if you type in Halloween on YouTube now, you'll probably find 10,000 reviews, and it's usually some nerd sat there going, well, then Michael Myers stabs his sister, and then he kills this, and then he does. And we don't really want to be giving that kind of vibe. We're just two mates sitting around talking about horror movies, and that's the vibe we want to do. If you're into that, great, stick about. If you're really looking for something a bit more intellectual, go fuck off, find something else. But yeah, my first experience with Halloween, I started watching horror movies from a really early age, so about sort of six, seven, something like that. And I think I saw Halloween for the first time when I was probably about 10. So I'd already had a good sort of 3 or 4 years horror movie watching by the time I got around to Halloween. And I think my my overall experience of the watching it for the first time was a bit underwhelming. I'd sort of started by watching films like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Um, I'd also watched films like The Exorcist and the and Amityville and films like a lot of supernatural stuff, but also a lot of more brutal stuff. So my taste for horror was even at that age was kind of wanting something either gory or really scary. And I remember feeling,
I get that. I think a bit tame, wouldn't it, compared to what you were watching before?
yeah. I mean, at the time, I'm guessing it wasn't because it was such a huge hit. But there are things which we'll get into. There are things that I really like about the movie, but there are also things that I really don't like about the movie that I don't think work quite as well. Oof, I can feel those dislike, but those thumbs down on the YouTube already. That's it. First episode. We're coming out swinging at Halloween.
Give us some love.
What a stance to take.
Give us some love.
Um, but I mean, what I would say in yeah, let's just get into it. Let's just have a talk about it. But I mean, watching it again this time, I mean, I tend to watch this, despite the fact I was underwhelmed. It's still a film that I've gone back to, and I still tend to watch the Halloween franchise, at least once every year or two, especially because now they've started making new films again. Um, I do return to it quite a bit, so I do get a lot of enjoyment out of it. One thing I do love about it, is obviously it's part of that classic John Carpenter oeuvre. I know it's his not his directorial debut. I think he did another one first, but it's one of his first movies that he did. It's on a shoestring budget. I know that the guy that owned the rights to it was it a card like a card. He basically said to John Carpenter, like, can you make this for 150 or $200,000 or something like that, or 300? I can't remember the exact number. Don't look to us for exact facts on this show either. We don't do facts. If you want somebody that knows something, go fucking Wikipedia that shit. But
Anybody can do that.
yeah, one thing I love about it is it's got that classic Carpenter vibe that a lot of the later Carpenter stuff that I love has. It's got the soundtrack that works. It's got a lot of slow build of suspense and tension um, that goes. But yeah, that's one of the things I love. I'm a big John Carpenter guy.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that we have to remember about this particular film about Halloween, I mentioned it before, it's from 1978. We are from a totally different generation, and we've been a little bit spoiled with, better special effects, better, movie making techniques. We're a little bit spoiled in that respect. So picking up a film which is even before my time, I know you're young, a lot younger than me, Damo, you're like a teenager compared to me, but picking up something which is so old, I mean, it's very different for us to watch it now when we're so spoiled with so much stuff.
I understand what you're saying. I get that a lot when I talk Halloween with people. And like I said, I'm not coming at this from like I hate it at all. I get a lot of enjoyment from Halloween, but a lot of people come back and say, well, you got to bear in mind it's '78 and stuff like that. But bear in mind, Texas Chainsaw Massacre was 1973.
True.
Black Christmas was 1973. The Exorcist, oh no, 1974. Sorry, both of them. The Exorcist was 1973. You know, you had The Omen,
Good point.
which was sort of, was that 76 or something like that. But like you had scary movies with different, you know, with harder edges than Halloween going into this. So
Oh yeah, definitely. But look at the reaction to some of those movies that you mentioned back when they were originally brought out. You know, people, sat giving out leaflets to people because
true that.
they were considered as so scary. I think Halloween kind of took a little bit step back from that to make it a little bit more commercial in its approach. So it's much more widely accepted than, likes of The Exorcism, which had
Yeah, yeah.
people handing out, things as people walked out of the cinema because they were so scary. People trying to ban these movies and things like that. Whereas Halloween kind of it dialed it back a little bit to make it more acceptable. It was still in a time where that type of horror, that whole slasher, that whole shock type of thing was still not that widely accepted.
True that. And like I said, we're not going to go blow by blow on the plot, but just so people have an outline of reference. The film is about Michael Myers, a young boy of 6, who, for no reason whatsoever, stabs his sister to death one Halloween night, is committed to an insane asylum, and then escapes and somehow manages to drive to Haddonfield, where he bumps into Laurie Strode and her friends, and proceeds to not do a lot really for a huge period of a movie, except stand there looking spooky, and then we
It
get
was a
20 minutes.
massive, huge kind of build up of tension and creepiness and everything else. And it was one of those like, is anything going to happen here? A little bit like the creepy neighbor hiding behind a bush. But it started out quite cool actually. You mentioned there that obviously it's one Halloween 1963, I think it was in the movie, wasn't it? Halloween 1963 when he
Yeah,
sort of walks upstairs and like slashes the crap out of his sister as it was, and it's like a first person view, isn't it, as it first comes on, which is quite good. I
yeah,
quite
yeah.
like
It's
that
like you've
after
seen it
what.
through the mask eyes, aren't you? Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. And it's sort of like that's kind of nice after you've literally seen that Halloween credit thing scroll up for the like what seemed like forever
yeah.
before
The
the
pumpkin
actual
with the
movie kicked
orange.
in.
Yeah,
Yeah, and straight away as well, boobies. Boobies are always good. Boobies in the first few minutes. I'm down with that.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's good. I would say that the kill scene. I think like all the kill scenes in Halloween, this is one of the things I'm not a big fan of. I think all the kill scenes in this movie are pretty bad.
yeah,
And really,
pretty tame. There was
they're
there was
not so much the
nothing
tame
really
as
in that, was there?
they're just really corny. I mean, I'm not particularly looking for them to be crazy gory. I'm not saying that, but like there's a high amount of cheese for something that's meant to be so shocking and meant to be this universally scary movie. So like when you see through the eye sockets of the mask, and she sat there at a dresser, and he's just been like, it's quite cheesy, and
It is, yeah.
similarly when is it Annie who's the first one to die later on in the car?
Yeah,
Like that's the worst death, one of the worst deaths I've ever seen in cinema. Where he's built up for all this time, like he's been like standing and staring and like popping up and then dashing like a peeping tom, and then you finally built up for this kill, and it basically strangles at Rebecca, and then she does this thing like at the window where she's like, "Ah," and her eyes just like go
yeah.
cross-eyed, and it looks so fake. Which is fine. I like schlock and I like corny stuff, but like my argument really is with people that say this is the best horror movie ever made or one of the scariest movies ever made. It's like
Well,
it's not really.
it's definitely not one of the scariest movies ever made at all. I mean, even the reactions to the killings are pretty tame as well. I mean, you take that first killing of his, in 1963 of his sister, and his parents come home just as he stood outside holding what
Yeah,
should really be a blood-soaked knife, but there's really nothing on the knife at all. You don't really see anything. But the like, parents just stand there like looking at the kid, obviously knowing what he's done. It's like the longest scene ever as the camera sort of like pans out, like your kid's got a blood-soaked knife.
yeah. They're
What are you
almost
gonna
like
do?
stood there looking at him like,
Yeah, just it's
Michael,
like,
what have you been up to?
it's like
Something.
explain. If you want an explanation of why do you have a blood-soaked knife, where's your sister? by the way.
Explain yourself, young man.
Yeah,
It's just
it's just a little bit, I don't, drawn out for what seemed like they wanted some kind of effect, but it just doesn't give anything. It's like they could have filled that time with something better.
yeah, yeah, I agree. I think the soundtrack is big in this movie though. Like when that happens, it's like there's a big dip in the like almost organ-like cheese to it, but it works really well. I think John Carpenter did a great job with the score on this one. I think the Halloween theme itself is one of the best in horror. Um,
But as a musician, though, because I know you're a musician as well, it is a bit simple. And I know it's from way ago. I guess there wasn't really any massive sort of big horror scores before that. You probably correct me on that. But yeah, it sounded pretty basic, pretty plinky plonky, like a toddler playing on a piano.
Yeah, but I think that was born out of necessity, really, from budgetary requirements. So, I
Yeah.
mean, but you can hear John Carpenter talk about it a lot. He talks about it on In Search of Darkness, which is a horror documentary I recommend everybody watch on Shudder. It's about 4 hours long. It just goes through the whole of the 80s, looking at all the movies that came out. And there's a second part that's fucking awesome. But yeah, on it, John Carpenter says, like, originally, the budget was so small, they didn't have money for an orchestra or a big time muso to come in and score it. And he's a really accomplished musician himself,
Yeah,
so
it is. Yeah.
he just he just bought a synth and fiddled around and did the whole score on that. And yeah, I agree it's simple, but I mean I think it's a bit odd because it's in a 5/4 time signature, which you don't get a lot of.
Yeah, it's also in a
Especially
lot of sort of minor chords and stuff like that. So it
yeah.
does definitely feel uncomfortable
I think it's one of the
in terms of
strengths of the
listening.
movie. Um, the score. I think it's one of the things it's got working in its favor.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, it does kind of add though to the predictability as you go on, don't you think? Sort of when the
mm,
music starts, oh, here comes Mike, he's coming.
yeah, that's one of those horror tropes, in it? Really, like it's funny because there's the part where the kids, is it Tommy Doyle and the young girl that Laurie and Annie are babysitting? Like just when they find out that the boogeyman's there, they run out, and then the soundtrack kicks in, and then they just start screaming. Like there's no sign of Mikey whatsoever, but the soundtrack kicks in, and they're just like, ah! Like, did you hear that too? Did you hear that too? One of the thing, I mean, another thing that I think this film really does have going for it, because all we've done is shit on this movie so far, um, is I really like the long drawn out suspense um, of the movie going into it. So, like when Annie and Laurie and I can't remember the third girl's name, so bad. But yeah, when they're walking and you just see, you'll see Michael, and then it'll pan back and he's disappeared. Or when they shout, when they see him stood at the end of the block, and then they go look and he's gone. There's
Yeah,
a
how
lot
how
of
does he know? How does he know that they're going to turn around right at that minute? I mean, that's sneaky, like creepy pedophile stalker stuff. That.
He's just a creepy motherfucker. That's what Mikey. But that's the point. He's meant to be the boogeyman. This is why when Rob Zombie did the remake in 2007, it came under so much criticism because he becomes this hulking monster with this backstory. He looks more like a pro wrestler than the boogeyman. And that's the whole point of Michael Myers in Halloween is that he's meant to
Simplistic.
be. Yeah, they call him
Yeah,
the Shape, don't they? He's meant to be the
yeah,
shape of fear.
yeah.
He's meant
That's
to
the
be the
faceless
boogeyman.
mask and everything, isn't it? It's
Yeah,
it's about being a little bit uncomplicated, very very simple type of fear.
the guy
Something
that's
that they
lurking in
see,
the
and then
shadows.
and then he disappears, and that it kind of plays on your mind. Did you sort of see that? Did I really just see that? Because when you look again, it's not there.
Yeah,
And yeah, I get that. It's very clever the way that they sort of do that. If you put yourself into, the actual character's shoes of what they're actually seeing, that would fuck with your mind.
it does. Yeah, and it works in terms of building up suspense because you keep expecting something to happen, but for so long, nothing really does happen. Um,
I don't know. I think they've definitely robbed Star Wars of a couple of sound effects. I mean, obviously the characters in
yeah.
the movie wouldn't have heard the Darth Vader sort of, breathing thing that he does. And it's like, wrong film, dickhead. Get back in
Speaking
Star
of Star
Wars.
Wars, what did you think to give me opinion on Dr. Loomis?
Do you know what? I can't unsee him from James Bond.
Oh yeah, I'm not a
Because
Bond
obviously
fan
that was
really.
that was that was one of his sort of really big roles, and when I first sort of like looked at it, I hadn't realised before because I was obviously so young when I saw it the first time. I was like, oh, it's him from Bond, that villain. He just kind of needed like a furry cat, to make it all work in this movie. But yeah, with Loomis, I don't know. It's a bit of a corny character, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
a bit wishy-washy. I mean, there was one particular scene when they actually go to the Myers house, and I was absolutely pissing myself. I watched it with my wife, and it's where the window smashes, and
Oh
my
yeah.
wife jumped before Loomis did on screen, which was for me was just hilarious. She literally jumped like 2 seconds before he jumped. I was just such a delayed reaction. I know it's in the film and stuff, and it's probably like delayed. It's not in time, but I like that jump scare feeling, where it makes you jump. And this film didn't really do that. But yeah, it was that little bit over-egged. It seemed for me for Loomis as a character. It was a little bit like overacted, a little bit.
Well, that's his whole stick. Is he's meant to be like like really hams it up, and really comes across as this crazy doctor. I mean, what I don't get is why the police department suddenly start taking orders from him when he comes to Haddonfield and manages to get the chief of police to follow him around the entire town all night. I mean, there's robberies going on. I mean, when we first meet that Sheriff Bracken, who's Annie's dad, like he's at a crime scene where the shop's been broken into, but suddenly he manages to take all of his time off so that he can so that he can escort
Yeah.
Dr. Loomis around hunting the shape. Another thing as well about Bracken, the chef, when Laurie and Annie are driving towards him, like they're hotboxing that car. The smoke that they've got a spliff on hand,
Oh
and
yeah.
they
What
suddenly
about the
begin.
music though that's playing as you see the car falling behind? Blue Oyster
Yeah.
Cult, Don't Fear the Reaper. Brilliant
Oh
little
yeah.
touch, that. Brilliant touch.
It is a great touch. Yeah, but they're like hotboxing the car, smoking the spliff, and then they pull up in front of Annie's dad, pull the window down, and there's no smoke that comes out. Like you can't smell that shit. Like I would smell that shit. Like
You
I
can
would.
smell when you're driving and you're in traffic and you know somebody in one of the cars in front is smoking weed. You can smell it. So how the hell
I
did
can
that?
smell a spliff 3 blocks down my road right now if someone's
But even
sparking
if
it
it
up.
wasn't, a spliff as well, if it
Yeah,
was just just normal tobacco, which they probably shouldn't have been smoking,
yeah,
you'd
yeah,
still smell that shit, surely.
yeah. It's one of the many misconceptions in Halloween. But going back to Loomis and Star Wars, see, I will bring it full circle. That role was offered to a couple of people first before they got Donald Pleasance. So they originally offered it to Peter Cushing, um, General Tarkin himself from Star Wars, who turned it down because he'd just done Star Wars and thought he was a massive big shot now and didn't want to do this tiny little indie flick. And it was also offered to Christopher Lee, who turned it down. I'd have loved to have seen Christopher Lee take on, not to take anything away from Donald Pleasance. He's one of my all-time favorite horror characters, but I'm a huge Christopher Lee fan. But he turned it down as well, and then went on to say it was the biggest mistake he ever made in movies. I would argue that with him. I think appearing in The Howling 2, My Sister is a Werewolf, is Christopher Lee's biggest mistake in movies. But that's a tale for another time.
That's another time.
But yeah, Loomis is he is really corny, but at the same time, he's meant to portray this kind of obsession that grows more as we get through the franchise. He kind of sees Michael for what he is. Like he's worked with him for so long, and he's come to the conclusion that Michael is just evil, and he just now needs to be locked away. So when he escapes, he loses his shit, and it becomes all about the chase and getting Michael back off the streets. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's corny, but yes, I also think the movie needs that.
Yeah, I think you're probably right, actually. I think without that type of character, to tie it all together, it would lose something.
I think he's the best actor in the movie. He was the most expensive actor in the movie. I know that for a fact. Like I think they had about 30 grand, $30,000 left in the budget when they were casting. Like, well, who can we get? We need to get someone good, and they could afford Donald Pleasance. I think they had to add another $10,000 on and bring it up to 40,000, and they got him for 2 weeks or something like that. So he just rocked up for 2 weeks, did his scenes, and then fucked off, which is such a
Look,
Donald Pleasance thing, if you know. I like
speaking
his
of sort of like big actors and stuff like that, it was quite nice to actually see Jamie Lee Curtis in a role so young as well. Because obviously we
debut
all
role,
know her
yeah.
from we'll all know her from, her later roles in so many big movies and stuff like that. To actually see her, obviously, in this as young as she was, I don't think I've ever seen her in a role that young.
That's crazy because I haven't seen her in the roles that you're talking about. I know her from horror growing up, and she was like a big screen queen in the late 70s, early 80s. So Halloween was the first movie I ever saw Jamie Lee in, which is her first ever movie. And then I saw her in Prom Night and Terror Train, and I can't remember the other one that's going on there. I think there's some, Terror Train and Prom Night and a couple of others. So I'd not really seen her in many of the later films that you're talking about. But she I think she gives an adequate performance in this. I mean, she's quite strong as a final girl.
Yeah.
She's sort of it's kind of an archetype for what would then go on to be the final girl, and I think she does a good job.
Yeah, she's a pretty strong character in this, which is good. Yeah, I thought she gave a good performance. To be honest, she was one of the better ones in my opinion within it. Um, there's a couple of weak performances, such as the whole orgasm death, as I'm going to call it, where it sounded more like she was actually having sex than she was actually dying, which was just a bit poor. And there's also a few characters in it as well, which are kind of really bit parts that don't really need to be there as well.
Yeah,
But yeah, Jamie Lee was pretty good in it, to be fair.
I think both those deaths, with the the orgasm death is hilarious. But also when is it Linda and her boyfriend Paul, when Paul dies, like Michael he rocks up and stabs him with a knife and manages to pin him to the wall. I don't
Yeah,
think that's how that works. I'm sure that's not how
no,
physics works.
no, and it was literally like he could pick up this huge guy, and excuse the dog whining. She's heard me talking about horror movies, or either that she just really likes Jamie Lee Curtis. But yeah, it was. If you actually look at the knife when it's actually, and this is about the whole realism and that organic side of things for me that I like in a movie. That this one I didn't feel had in a lot of parts. He literally, he stabbed him, and most of the knife wasn't actually in at all. And you're thinking, hang on a minute, this knife is actually holding up this whole guy's weight. And then they cut obviously to the side shot, and you can sort of see it side, and you can actually see. And maybe it's just the time, and obviously, like I said, we've been spoiled by better effects from now. But you can actually physically see that the knife is wobbling when he's walking towards it. But then when he actually pins him to the wall, you can see the knife is actually beyond him. So it's
Yeah,
not in him. You can see it's beyond him, and the angles just aren't quite right for it. I was 1978, so obviously they were still using proportional camera work and stuff like that. But yeah, I get your point. That's not how physics works. It's a bit
I mean, even Michael Myers looks
strange.
confused by it because he pins him to the wall and then he kind of looks at him like does the head to one side, but like the puppy dog look. Even he looks confused by it. But that being said, it's not the worst. It's not the worst kill. I mean, it's silly because it wouldn't happen, but it's far from the worst kill. It's a good image of him just banging the knife through and pinning him to the wall. I think it's quite cool.
Yeah, but for all the guy, he literally picks him up pretty much one-handed, doesn't he? Picks up
Yeah,
this guy and pins him to the wall and stabs him there. But then, really annoyingly, a knitting needle can, you know, literally take him down.
I know. It's like a small prick, my one weakness, and then just bails down. It's amazing how much punishment. It's amazing how much of a killing machine Michael Myers is until the final act when he becomes absolutely shit at killing.
Yeah, but he takes, what was it, 6 bullets, but he manages to stumble over the balcony in this final scene, but not over the balcony, onto the balcony, and then throws himself off.
Yeah,
But you think of all the things that had happened before that, like I think she stabbed him, hadn't he, with the knitting needle, and he literally, that put him out. I'm not quite sure what happened there. Maybe he hit a nerve in his neck and it paralyzed him. I'm trying to think of a medical reason why that would work.
yeah.
But yeah,
Just
there's just a
weakest to
few,
miss.
yeah, just a few little bits like that I didn't sort of find believable when building up to some, what you expect to be quite an epic final battle.
Yeah. That being said, there's some really great moments in this movie that kind of make it of an era. I think when you watch the movie, it's very distinctly, late 70s, early 80s. That glow about it. You've got Linda who says like totally after every like after every sentence when she's talking, she's like, "Yeah, totally, totally." I think it's like 14 or 15 times in 2 minutes she manages to say it. Fucking great, but you can
You've been
definitely
you've
tell
been
it.
you've been going with the rewind button, haven't you?
Yeah, that's
How
it.
many
Just
times
try
was
to.
that? What?
How many times has she said totally? Fucking too many is how many times she says totally. But I'm not sure that's how people talk. But I wasn't a teenager in 1978. Wasn't even a sparkle in my father's eye in 1978. So can't be sure. But I mean, I don't. Who knows? Another cool thing about this is have have you ever seen Black Christmas?
No, it's one I've not seen, but one
Okay,
that I really do want to see, but I've never got around to seeing it.
so one of the arguments with Halloween is it's the original slasher. It's like the slasher that then spawned everything else, like Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street and all the other horror slashers of the 80s. Um, but if you go back, what, 6 or 7 years earlier to 1974, 73, something like that, you get Black Christmas, which is about an escaped psycho who attacks a sorority house on Christmas and one by one picks off these girls.
Almost a familiar plot.
It's a very familiar plot. It's a really good movie. I recommend you check it out. I think Margot Kidder's in it. It's one of her very early roles. Um, and it's a great film. I highly recommend you check it out. It's been remade twice. Skipped both of them. They're shite. We'll probably cover it on this at some point. But so yeah. But one of the interesting things is it for me. That's the first slasher movie. I mean, you had Psycho back in the late '60s that kind of set a tone and the groundwork. But then I think that you got Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Black Christmas in the early '70s, and they're for me are much more the first slasher movies than Halloween. And the interesting thing is John Carpenter at one point in the mid '70s was having a conversation with the director of Black Christmas, and he was like, "Well, what would you do if you did a sequel to Black Christmas?" And the director was like, "Well, I'd just have a psycho escape from a lunatic asylum and go on a killing spree on Halloween. That's what I'd do if I did a sequel." And years later, I mean, obviously, John Carpenter didn't rip it off because John Carpenter didn't write Halloween. He just directed it. It was written by someone else. He just got drafted onto the project. But it's a cool little coincidence, and I think there's a lot of similarities between Black Christmas and Halloween. I would say Black Christmas is actually the far scarier movie. So highly recommend checking that out if you get the chance.
Yeah, there's a few cool little bits like that in sort of Halloween as well, you know, relating to sort of the director and stuff like that, like such as the original The Thing, which was on TV that they were watching when Laurie was babysitting the two kids,
Yeah,
and obviously, as we know, Carpenter went on to actually remake that movie as well. Whether he knew he
yeah.
was going to do that at the time, and that's why he selected the movie to be on TV, I don't know. Whether it's just one of those iconic horrors for a Halloween, you know, theme to watch. But it's kind of a nice touch knowing what he went on to after.
Yeah, it's one of those classic horror movies. I mean, I've never seen it myself, actually. It's called Thing from Another World. I do know Carpenter loves that movie, though, 'cause he talks about it on that documentary. Um, but yeah, I mean, I would say it's a low budget movie. It was huge. Like it went on to make like bazillions of dollars. I don't know how much. Check Wikipedia if you need to know. But this thing like shit money for the longest time and inspired an entire generation. I mean, yeah, I said I prefer Black Christmas, but this took Black Christmas and really, I suppose, built on the frameworks, developed it into something similar, slightly different, and probably just caught the public awareness at the right time. And
Yeah,
it just
it spawned a great, you know, horror villain, didn't it? You know, in
yeah,
Michael Myers. You know, you think about Halloween, everybody knows Michael Myers. You know, whether you've seen all the films or not, whether you've only seen the more modern ones and stuff like that. You know, everybody knows Michael Myers as a character, and you know, it spawned a really, really good horror character that you know is still being, you know, invested into movies now. Obviously, we've got a new one coming out, so you know, it's obviously done a good job,
as
even
well as
though it's not one of
inspiring,
my favourites.
as well as an inspired movie character, definitely inspired a generation of other slasher movies
Yeah,
in the
absolutely.
'80s. Without, I mean, Sean Cunningham, who did the original Friday the 13th, said that they were just looking to make something like Halloween. That's why they did it on Friday the 13th, because they just wanted to do it on a holiday or a memorable day, like you had Halloween. So they did Friday the 13th.
Yeah, something people can relate to.
Yeah, something. Yeah, like a holiday day, and inspired things like Friday the 13th, like Freddy Krueger in A Nightmare on Elm Street, like Maniac, like all these awesome slasher movies, Graduation Day, Prom Night, Terror Train, all these really cool slashers that came about in the 80s. You don't get any of those without Halloween. So despite it not being one of my favorite slasher movies, well, yeah, I can't say. Despite it, for me, it not being as good as people make it out to be, you can't deny its influence on pop culture.
No, not at all.
So yeah,
No, not at all.
I mean, just to put a bit of a bow on this and wrap it up, because we don't want these shows to outstay their welcome. We don't want to go on too long, because I got shit to do. You got shit to do. You don't want to be sat listening to podcasts all day.
I just don't want to be looking at your face anymore, to be honest.
Bitch.
I'm liking the little tilt to the side. Are you
I'm just
gonna
ripping off
be
my
trick or treating in that on Halloween?
Yeah, absolutely. The problem is, like, we're going to be releasing this on YouTube, but if you're listening to this on Spotify or any of the ones that are not visual mediums, you're just going to be like, what the fuck's going on here? Lots of moody silences. Well, I'm just posing in the mask.
Posing in sort of an LED mask. You'll all have seen them pop up on adverts on Facebook for like creepy masks with the like LED cross eyes and the weird little venom face. And he's
Oh
wearing a
yeah,
hoodie,
man.
pretending to be all hard and intimidating, but he's
Trust
actually
me.
a bit of a softie underneath
No,
it. It's
no,
just
no. I'm scary. Trust me. Check this out. Check this shit. Ooh.
oh wow, it flashes.
One for the epileptics. Joking. Anyway, let's put a bow on Halloween 1. We've talked about it for a while now. So,
Yeah, let's give it a
give us your
rating. I think we've got to give it a rating. Around personal ratings.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna go with it. Well, you go first. You give us your rating.
I'm going
Give
to
us your
go
final thoughts on
for
your rating.
yeah. I'm going to go for a very solid 2.5 on this one. Not one of my favourite movies. I don't think it ever will be, but it is an old film, and for the time when it actually did, like we said, it spawned a lot of other horror slasher movies and stuff like that. So it's clearly iconic in its time. So I can't ignore that. Like I said, not one of my favourite movies. So solid 2.5 out of 5 for me.
2.5 out of 5. Wow, it's a bit harsher than I'm gonna be actually. Like I have shit on this movie quite a bit, but I shit on all my favorite movies. Like I pick them apart and just laugh at them, but it doesn't mean I don't love them. I tend to watch this at least every year, or at least every other year. It's one of those movies that if you put it on with a group of friends, you're not going to upset anyone. You're not going to, if you've got somebody that gets a bit too scared of horror movies, you're not gonna kill the party. Not like if you put something like I Spit on Thy Grave or something absolutely insane on. So it's a nice movie to put on for friends. It builds well. It's got a lot of suspense. I love the soundtrack. I'm a big Carpenter fan. Some of the kills are very silly. I don't think it's one of the greatest horror movies ever made, but I still think it's worth. I don't want to do out of 5. I'm going to do out of 10. 7 boyfriends pinned to a wall with a stupid knife out of 10. That's going to be my go-to on this one.
Fair enough. From a grade now of 10, then solid 5 for me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to going through the franchise again. There's a lot of them, some better than others, so we'll get into them more. Just rules for the franchise as well for people that are tuning in. So we basically are going to dictate a franchise as anything that's got more than one movie. So whether it's got one sequel or whether it's got a remake or a prequel or whatever, as long as there's more than one movie, um, we will touch it. We will touch that shit all over. Um, we don't want to we don't want to do ourselves out of any potential movies out there. So yeah, send in your requests for franchises that you want us to cover. Let us know what you think of Halloween in the comment section. Also,
Yeah,
let
I'm
us
sure
know.
people are going to disagree with us, absolutely, and that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, we've kind of come out episode 1 shitting on Halloween. But like I say, it's still a 7 out of 10 for me. I still very much enjoy this movie. But yeah, let us know in the comments. Find us on Facebook, your facebook.com/ebargo. Also Twitter @ebargo. I've also got a TikTok coming, have we, Tris? TikTok.
I think, yeah, we've got a TikTok going where you'll be seeing me and Damo doing some really, really stupid dances and stuff like that. No, there'll be none of that shit. None of that shit. I'm nearly 40. I do not get TikTok. I'm not gonna lie. Although I do find it quite amusing to look at other people's videos. So I'm sure we'll find some way of making it work. But yeah, there will be a TikTok coming. I think Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all the rest of it. Something called Twitch. I don't know what that is either. Twitch.
That's video games.
Is it? Ah, fair enough.
You've ruined it now. You've gone one step too far.
I was just looking at this. I'm 40. I'm nearly 40.
Dude. But yeah, thanks for tuning in. We have been Ebargo. I am Damien.
I am Tris.
We'll see you later. See you later, guys.